A carrier of H7N9 bird flu virus found on the mainland. Filibustering in coming alleged debate on the government budget. And North Korea celebrates 101st anniversary of the birth of its founder.
Good evening. Can you really trust what's on your food labels? The Consumer Council has found that certain corn-based food products contain genetically modified ingredients, but there is no mention about them on the packaging of the products. As Stephanie Wong reports, this goes against the Center for Food Safety's guidelines.
In a test of 49 samples, including baby food, popcorn, and canned corn, 12 were found to contain genetically modified or GM ingredients. Of those, 5 had GM materials exceeding the Center for Food Safety's threshold level of 5%, but none of them had labels that pointed to any presence of genetically modified products. The consumer watchdog, however, says there's no need for the public to worry about whether the food items are safe to eat.
I'm not saying that genetically modified products, they are unsafe. In fact, all these products, they have passed some sort of safety test overseas. It's based on the principle that consumers should be well informed of what they're actually buying from the retailers.
He also says negative labeling such as GM-free or non-GM should be avoided.
Now, mandatory labeling of all or specific types of GM food is already in place in a number of countries. The Consumer Council urges the government here to do the same and introduce the policy.
The Consumer Council also received 189 complaints involving sales of jewelry and watches in the first quarter of the year, up 32% from the same period last year. In one case, Ms. Fan bought a diamond ring for $38,000. She noticed the certificate that came with it had the words pinpoint internal graining, surface graining printed on it. But when she asked the salesperson what they meant, she was told to ignore them. Later on, she learned that the words referred to defects in the diamond, and she complained to the Consumer Council. The shop eventually offered to exchange her diamond ring for other jewelry in the store. The council advised consumers to watch out for dishonest sales practices such as leaving out product information or attempting to sell parallel goods that don't come with a global warranty. Stephanie Wong, TVB News.
Residents of Pyongyang were out in force today to celebrate the 101st anniversary of the birth of their first leader, Kim Il-sung. And apart from the usual propaganda posters, there was little or nothing to suggest that they were even aware of the international crisis unfolding across the region. Even North Korea's own media toned down the rhetoric today and gave little indication of how high the tensions actually are. Several weeks into the crisis, and foreign governments are struggling to assess how seriously to take North Korea's recent barrage of threats. But there's no mistaking their concerns that the high point of today's celebrations could be a much-anticipated test launch of a medium-range ballistic missile. There was no sense of anything particularly untoward in Pyongyang, where very few locals have access to international media. Braving the chilly spring weather, people stood in lines to lay bouquets of fake flowers at the bronze statues of the country's founder, Kim Il-sung, and his son, the late leader, Kim Jong-il. Kim Jong-un hasn't been seen in public for several days, but official party newspapers did release pictures of him attending a memorial for his grandfather at the Kumsusan Mausoleum late yesterday. Today marked the official start of the new year according to North Korea's Juche calendar, which begins with the day of Kim Il-sung's birth in 2012. But unlike last year, there are no big military parades planned, and North Koreans were planning to use it as a day to catch up with friends and family. But across the border, tensions and tempers are running high. South Korean protesters burned effigies of the 3 leaders of the Kim dynasty. They called on the international community to punish Pyongyang over its threats to start a nuclear war and its determination to develop weapons of mass destruction. And in Japan, visiting U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry reiterated Washington's firm resolve to support its allies in the region.
One thing is certain. We are united There can be no confusion on this point. The North's dangerous nuclear missile program threatens not only North Korea's neighbors, but it threatens its own people.
Japan remains on a high state of alert after it was reported late last week that the North has fueled at least one, possibly more, mid-range missiles, and they're ready for launch at any time. The London School of Economics, or LSE, has slammed the BBC for using an academic trip to North Korea as a cover to make a documentary. The LSE has also asked the BBC not to broadcast the material. 3 BBC journalists joined the Student Society trip at the end of March, posing as tourists attached to the university. The LSE says they were not fully briefed about the BBC's intentions, and the actions of the broadcaster put their students at risk. The university said the students had been told a journalist would be joining them, but were unaware that the journalist would be accompanied by a 2-man film crew. The BBC denies any intention to mislead the students and claims that they were fully aware of the situation even before they'd signed up for the trip. The LSE says the BBC used the students as human shields.
Students weren't properly sat down and briefed as to what will go on. Students have been told before that there might be 1 journalist going on, but that would be print journalism, whereas actually we had 3 journalists and it was going to be a film documentary.
The number of confirmed H7N9 avian flu cases on the mainland has risen to 61. 13 patients have died. Meanwhile, Beijing health authorities have reported a H7N9 carrier, a 4-year-old boy who tested positive for the virus but shows no symptoms of illness. Elmi Lung reports.
The plastic tapes are up to seal off the area at Nidong village in Beijing, where one of the latest cases of H7N9 avian flu was found. He is a 4-year-old boy whose family has a shop selling poultry and fish. The boy was found to have the infection because officials were testing people who came into contact with a 7-year-old girl, the first person in Beijing to be diagnosed with the H7N9 bird flu in the current outbreak. The boy's neighbor bought a chicken from the parents of the girl. The girl's mother also developed a fever, but her temperature has come down and is in good condition. Other shopkeepers in the village are now disinfecting their premises 3 times a day. Local people are worried that the virus may be passed from human to human. Officials disinfected the area near the boy's home today and took samples from pigeons from near the family's shop. The boy is now under observation at Ditan Hospital. As for the 7-year-old girl, Beijing's first case of H7N9 human infection, health authorities said she has made great progress and is now recovering in the general ward. University of Hong Kong microbiologist Ho Pak Leung says the latest case in Beijing suggests that the H7N9 virus may remain dormant in some people and the possibility of more carriers cannot be ruled out.
Whether this particular case represents such an example of subclinical infection or that the infection has been identified very early, before development of any symptoms, there is not enough information for us to draw any conclusion. But it would require further investigation, such as by taking blood from the child to see if there is any antibody against this H7N9 virus.
He believes there may be many more cases than the 61 confirmed so far, which makes it all the more important for strict preventative measures in Hong Kong. Elmi Lung, TVB News, Beijing.
Hugo Chávez's hand-picked successor has won Venezuela's presidential election by a very thin margin. As Nicolas Maduro and his supporters celebrate success, his rival, Enrique Capriles, refuses to accept election loss and is now demanding a recount.
With 99.2% of the ballots counted, Nicolas Maduro edged out opposition leader Enrique Capriles, who won 49.07% of the vote. The news sent Maduro supporters setting off fireworks in the streets and racing through downtown Caracas, blasting off horns in jubilation. Maduro was quick to deliver his victory speech outside the presidential palace. He told the crowd that his victory was further proof that Chávez continues to be invincible. Over at Capria's headquarters, the sense of defeat was crushing. Some supporters cried while others stared in disbelief as the results were announced by an electoral council stacked with government loyalists. But knowing all ballots were not accounted for, Caprias rejected the official tally. Visibly angered, he addressed Maduro through the camera and said, "The biggest loser today is you, and the people don't love you." Venezuela's electronic voting system is completely digital, and because it generates a paper receipt for each vote, a quick vote-by-vote recount is possible. And that's exactly what Caprias is demanding. Even though Maduro insists his victory was clean, he did agree to holding a recount. After all, there was voter fraud accusations on both sides. Some Maduro voters accused Caprias supporters of crowding the polling stations with fake queues to delay the inevitable Maduro win. Plus, Venezuelan Vice President Jorge Arriaza confirmed hackers tried to breach security at the National Electoral Center's website. Despite all the ill feelings, both men urged their supporters to refrain from violence. But while Maduro supporters continue celebrating in the capital, the election dispute raises fears of political unrest, especially because the election board said Maduro's win is irreversible and gave no indication it would allow for a recount.
And still ahead in our newscast, a transsexual takes the fight to get married to the top court. Talks between striking dockers and their contractors resume tomorrow. And a Texas City Hall demolished in an implosion.